so much to discuss. If only we had all afternoon, because I'm sure this Q&A could go on for a while. But let's try and get straight down to it. Who is going to have the first question for our lovely panellists? I know you've all been furiously keeping track of what questions that you thought about at 10 a.m. this morning. Yes, the lovely lady at the back there.
Doing Challenge Annika Stiley?
Yeah.
Hi, it's a question for Mark from Nottingham. I'm very interested in your presentation. What you didn't actually mention was, have you charted the improvement in air quality in terms of all the initiatives that you've put in place? Because clearly that's a very important aspect to understand.
Is this on? Can you hear? I'll shout.
Try now.
Hello? Hello? Is that on?
It is on.
Yeah. It is on.
Just
okay.
the speakers are that way, so you can't really hear it on the stage.
Yeah, if you recall, a few years ago, Nottingham was included in the list of cities that were required to look into a clean air zone. It was ourselves, along with Derby, Southampton, London, and a few other places. It's quite strange that big cities like Liverpool, Manchester, Sheffield weren't in it. I think the government's modelling was a bit out of whack. We did some more modelling, and we were told, probably about this time last year, that because of the work that we're doing and continue to do, we now don't have to have a clean air zone in Nottingham. But that was on the proviso that we carry on doing what we're doing. So if we should stop for whatever reason, then there may be a risk that we would have to have a clean air zone. So we have to be careful around the funding that is all coming to an end next year. That's all government funding. Then what do we do to continue this? So there is other bids in the irons in the fire, if you like. But yeah, so we have hopefully we're on the right track in terms of air quality.
Thank you. Next questions. Oh, there we are. Susie.
Hi, it's just a general question. We touched just a minute ago about the loss of revenue that the government would incur from from fuel duty. Any sort of ideas on what the replacement for that is going to be and when that might be implemented?
I've got the mic, so I'll answer that first very quickly. I think that it'll be done on miles driven.
It's going to be road charging, definitely. And as someone who's stopped 100 billion quid's worth of VAT and fuel duty rises with Fair Fuel UK, that's definitely the signals we're getting from the Treasury, that they'll enact a system where there is no duty on conventional fuels and no VED, but you pay per mile.
Can I just add to that? I hesitate to criticise the question, but I wonder whether a more interesting way of thinking about this is to say, well, every year when fuel excise duty comes up for review, there's always a little bit of, oh, will they, won't they? And we know they won't. So I can't remember when the last time the government...
2010.
Was it?
Yeah.
2010? Was it? Do you know, that's quite a long time ago. I actually had a feeling it was longer ago than that, but I haven't checked the figures. So there we go, 2010. So maybe a more interesting way of thinking about it is why has the government for almost a decade willingly foregone the revenue it could be getting by raising fuel excise duty as it could do?
I've got 146 MPs who support our campaign, and that's why we've kept it down, because it affects the cost of living.
Yeah, fantastic. So there we have a fantastic example of the difficulties of making this transition to a low-carbon economy, because the government, and quite rightly concerned about the cost of living, is continuing to effectively subsidise fossil fuel use.
Could I make a very brief comment?
Sorry, no, I was just going to say, it's not necessarily subsidising fossil fuels, it's how you're going to pay for all the infrastructure and the roads. You were just saying about subsidising fossil fuels. It's about paying for the road system.
Well, we probably don't need a philosophical discussion now about how we should fund infrastructure spending in this country. I mean, Obviously, it's purdah, so we have to be careful. But as a general rule, if you are defraying or delaying or removing charges on fossil fuel use, then that's a choice. That's an economic choice, but it's also a political choice. And I think your point is well made, that the reason that choice has been made by governments past and present is because members of parliament support that, and it would be a politically difficult thing to do to restore levels of road tax, of fuel excise duty that might have been expected if it had kept pace with the science on climate change.
A brief comment. I believe it's correct that some US states are putting quite high, essentially, road taxes on electric vehicles now to recover the revenue. But of course, every country has a different situation. And I certainly think that charge per mile is the fairest, but it's how you implement it and so on. So I'll stop there.
I think this is an interesting question about how we bring consumers with us on this journey. And I think there are issues like we in our EV bubble, as EV early adopters and EV evangelists, assume that people will give up their cars, their diesel and their petrol cars, quite readily. And we're asking them, and we quote this thing about them only doing 17 miles on a commute. You don't spend 30, 35 grand on a car that will only do 150 to 190 miles. And we expect them to give up their Focuses, their Corsas, their Astras, their Fiestas, and buy these cars that at the moment are limited. And we are telling them that the WLTP range is this, but in reality, when you drive it in real-world conditions, especially on motorways, you're getting 30% less than WLTP. So this is kind of disingenuous of us to do this. And if you look at Bristol with their plans to ban all diesel if they get government approved by 2021, this is a huge assumption that people will be able to give up their cars and afford the 20, what's a Nissan Leaf with a 60 kilowatt now? It's nearly 30 odd grand.
Second hand, I think you can get one for about 7. But yeah, I'm not
yeah,
sure
one of the early ones is not very good, trust me. I've got a 2015. And I only get 70 miles to one charge. And I drive like the district nurse trying to harvest all this energy. So we've got to be really, really careful that we take these people with us on a journey and we're clear and transparent and honest about managing their expectations.
Yeah. I'm keen for us to move on, open up other questions, but just to build on this, you think about how many of us bought diesel cars when we were encouraged by the government to buy diesel. So I think there's a residual thing about not knowing whether this is the right choice right now. I mean, environmentally, yes, it makes sense. Economically, we've been stung once already. Do we want to get stung again? So there is that element. But let's have another question.
Oh, down here at the front. Sorry, making you run around.
It's okay. It's good exercise.
Yeah, just before lunch.
I'd like to touch upon more the sort of light commercial vehicle and heavy commercial vehicles. I think it wasn't covered in too much detail. Do you see there is a future where it kind of becomes a split and e-mobility is all about the passenger cars, but actually the commercial vehicles go another route, or maybe they stick to diesel and cleaner diesel because it's more practical and more cost effective?
So I've got the microphone, so I'll start very briefly. So good question. I couldn't actually see your face while you were asking the question. So I think the opportunity for electrification for heavy goods vehicles is difficult. And that's why there's a lot of talk now about hydrogen in terms of powering heavy transport. The thing about hydrogen, twofold. One is we've been there before, so there's always been this kind of dawn, a false dawn of hydrogen. There's a lot of industry chatter now that hydrogen has a big role to play. But ultimately, given that we're trying to address the environment, it's where you source that hydrogen. So the cleanest form of hydrogen is electrolysis, which is quite an expensive way to produce it. So I think the jury's still out. But there's the one final thing I was just going to say is, for all these technologies, not just in transport, in power generation, heating, for example, as we decarbonize our economy, there is no single solution. So there's a portfolio of technologies out there, renewables, hydrogen potentially, carbon capture. These are all going to play different roles. So I think with transport, you may have a number of technologies playing there.
Hi. So I guess in my opinion, the future of road transport full stop is electric. Whilst it might be more challenging for kind of large vehicles and commercial vehicles because of higher capex and so on, the advantage they have is that they have a greater utilization typically, and greater utilization is the main benefit for electric vehicles, because the longer you run them, the more benefit you can get from the cheaper operating costs. And so really, there's no doubt that there's actually possibly even greater benefits. And even if it was only a few years ago that people thought it wouldn't be possible, and then Tesla, came out with a, let's call it articulated lorry, and others are coming as well. When it comes to hydrogen, I learnt quite an expensive lesson 18 years ago when I started a fuel cell and hydrogen company, that whilst the technology might be quite exciting for many reasons, it's ultimately very expensive. And the challenge, and we had this point running through earlier, to get people into electric vehicles, you really need to present a business case which puts the odds in favour of electric vehicles. And one of the challenges with hydrogen is maybe it is the most abundant element in the universe, but it's always combined with something else. It's either combined with water or it's combined with a fossil fuel. If you use a fossil fuel to separate it, you're not really solving the problem. And if you use water, then if you go through the process of electrolysis, storage, compression, then reversing it through a fuel cell, you'd be lucky if you had 20% of the energy you had in the first place. And what that ultimately translates to is much more cost. And so being able to charge a vehicle for the additional part of the route that you would otherwise benefit from, longer route without needing to charge, doesn't really work when you come into that. So I think it's pretty clear that road transport full stop is electric, or will be.
I think for the lighter vehicles, no argument. The sooner they go electric, the better. For the heavy ones, tricky.
I didn't have time to talk about heavier transport in my presentation, but I definitely agree with you. There's a lot happening now with heavier transport. Volvo just announced a full electric heavy what do you call it? Heavy goods vehicle. And we should also remember that I think this was in the 70s or 80s. Someone in Europe decided on a very good rule. Today it's a very good rule. It says that you have to have a break after driving 4 hours in a heavy-duty vehicle all over Europe. They didn't know that then, but that's very beneficial now for electric heavy duty. And actually, I think there's more happening with electric heavy duty than hydrogen at the moment. With buses, especially city buses, we already see that this is becoming commercially viable, and more cities are deciding now that they want to do all electric buses. Even in poorer countries, they're doing this now. In Norway, I also would like to mention the maritime sector. We don't produce cars, but we do manufacture. We have a big maritime sector. By the end of 2021, we will have more than 60 fully electric ferries in Norway. Big car ferries, they are fully electric because it's economically. It's a good economic choice. There are also a Norwegian company, Yara, that are now making a full electric container ship, which is also to be autonomous. Of course, it's not a long distance ship, but it's going to go down the Oslofjord to transfer goods. And there's also a lot of other areas where it's a lot of action now. For example, zero emission construction sites. a big part of the emissions on a city level is actually construction. And to make that electric, or at least biofuel, will reduce emissions in cities a lot. So Oslo, the city of Oslo now have a big project on this, and we see electric diggers in the city, etc. So there's a lot happening.
If we just walk that idea through about LCVs and HGVs being electric as well, that means we will have to have separate charging hubs for HGVs and possibly LCVs as well, like vans, because you can't mix the two, or you start to think about large charging hubs on motorways with 12 to 20 megawatts coming in to cope for it.
You can actually. There are now new charging manufacturers that making charging infrastructures that are more talking about this now, that you can, because that's actually what is very beneficial when it comes to charging, and especially rapid charging and above, is that passenger cars are often in need of rapid charging on different times than utilities. Heavy duties and light commercial vehicles. So this is really good, because when the use is more sort of all over the whole day, it's also more of a business case. So I think that is key actually to make charging functioning, that you can actually have different types of vehicles, also buses, using the same charging hubs with chargers that can actually deliver to different types of vehicles, and that is there are things happening in this area.
See, I told you we could go on all afternoon. We need more time, but it's nice to see that you guys are all in agreement, all nodding your head together. I think we've probably only got time for maybe one or two more questions. So if you do have a question, get it in now.
Hi, thank you. What does the panel think of some really simplistic ideas like better signage on the motorways to say that there's actually a charger in place at the next service station, and maybe green number plates so that the public can actually distinguish electric cars and see the growth, see them used?
Do you mean there's a charging station that works at the next service station? That would be even better.
Well, you get to see what kind of coffee you can buy, whose sandwiches you can buy, but you don't know whether there's a charger there.
I agree.
Look, the French have a fantastic little sign for all their chargers, and they direct you to them. And it's such a simple thing, and we should have adopted this a long time ago. I'm not convinced about the green number plates. If the government thinks that they are going to make us feel all cosy inside because we're driving a green car, I think they've maybe lost the plot a bit. There are many more strategic issues we should be talking about than green number plates. And we've got the ANPR cameras to work out which car is electric and which car isn't. So I think this is not world-class thinking.
It would help the parking wardens.
Can I disagree with you once more? Sorry. I think, and we don't have the green number plates, but we have special number plates starting with, we started with EL, ran out of those, continued with EK, ran out of those. Now and then we ran out of EV, and now we're at EB. So it's very easy to spot them. And I would argue that in initial phases where you're now, this is very important, because it makes most people don't know what an EV looks like. And this makes people think, hey, that's an electric car, and also when you have bus lanes and things like that, it's easy to know whether the car is allowed or not. So I think it's a good idea, and you should definitely get green number plates.
Good luck with that in Birmingham. Just to jump in as well. So, in terms of notifying people, I mean, anything that can make it easier to show people where you can easily charge, I definitely support. I think as time goes on, I think it'll probably become less important, because as we become more connected, vehicles will tell us you can charge here, stop here for 10 minutes, and you'll be able to continue your journey on time. You're already seeing that for anyone who's got a Tesla. They're already making it pretty amazing to work out journey planning and so on. In terms of number plates, personally, I'm a supporter. As long as there are obvious benefits that you can get from them. So, if you get a green plate, you can drive in this lane, you can park here, and so on. I think that'd be quite a good swing. I think if there aren't obvious benefits, and you just kind of get a vehicle, and stick a green badge on, I'm not sure that's going to motivate a lot of people. But if there are some obvious things that you can do, then I think people will
definitely take advantage of that.
Do you want the last word, or I'll go first so you can rebut. So I don't care very much about green number plates. I think that there are good arguments for doing it, but if it takes someone more than a few weeks to sort, then maybe we have bigger fish to fry. I think we're agreed on that. But that is an important part of the public perception of things. I just want to come back to another thing you said about signage and visibility. So on a serious note, I know you were probably mostly talking about highways, but one of the things that the Transport for London and the Mayor of London's task force on EV infrastructure, which I was a part of, which I mentioned in my talk, one of the things we looked at was how this fits with what we call the street furniture. And there's a lot of pressure from London civil society groups, including Living Streets and so on, to make it blend in with the environment and be part of the street furniture. I get that, I completely agree. However, if I'm driving around looking for a charge point, I don't want it to blend in. I want it to be really obvious that there's a charge point there. So I don't mean to sound glib or dismissive of those views. It's a really difficult thing to get right. Fortunately, we have someone here from a city council.
Sorry. That's all right. I think the question is, well, we live in a digital world. What you're saying is, do we need these analog things? Because I can drive my car, press a button to say, find nearest charger, and I know that it's going to be in this. What's the difficult bit is actually finding it once you've left the motorway and actually navigating around the car park, actually finding where that is. So I think signs are very useful for that. Maybe not so useful off the motorway, but I know 6 or 7 years ago, I think the government said, we're committed to putting a sign on every motorway. They didn't. I think they left it up to some of the operators to put on the odd eco-tricity sign, and some of them haven't, some of them don't. Coming from a council perspective, I think the green number plates will be a good thing, because for our bus lane, it would probably stop the idiots trying to take the law into their own hands and cut in front of the EV drivers who are legitimately supposed to be in there, if they can see the green number plate. And also for our parking staff, when they're in car parks, they don't have to get their kind of automatic thing out. They just go, oh, it's a green number plate, it's charging up fine, I can walk on. So I think for enforcement purposes, I think the green number plate would be very useful. And also, just from a perception purpose, people seeing that there's more EVs on the road now, they're not some kind of science fiction thing.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for that question. Sadly, I think we might have to do it later, if that's all right. But everyone's hanging around for lunch, so if you do have any further questions, quickly grab them before they get stuck into their sandwich.